Hello, on today's video I'm going to show you how to disconnect a radiator if you need to remove it to decorate behind it, and also I'm going to show you how to flush the radiator out if you've got cold spots on the radiator that are preventing it from heating up properly. Okay, so to do the works you're going to need a few tools to get the job done, and the first thing we're going to need is a dust sheet to catch any water that may escape from the tubs that we're going to put down. And it's obviously especially important if you've got carpets to put a good dust sheet down. We're going to need a pair of adjustable pliers like that. We're going to need a pair of adjustable water pump pliers. We're going to need a screwdriver. We're going to need an air key. We're going to need a small container like that, a couple of pieces of cloth that we're going to put in the radiator, ends of the radiator valves there and there when we disconnected it. And the purpose of those is to stop any further water coming out of the radiator while we move it. Also recommend having a bucket handy as well in case this gets full up, and then we can just quickly put the water into there rather than having to go to the sink. And then also to do the job, probably important is to put a pair of gloves on, because what you can find is the nuts on the radiators when they're disconnected can have some bits of swarf in them, so it's always best to have a pair of gloves on. It just protects the hands from any damage. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in close in on the two valves to show you in a lot more detail how to turn them off first of all, and then disconnect them from the... Okay, so the first job is to turn both the radiator valves to the off position. So to do that, you turn this valve to the 0 position. That's the control valve. And then the lock shield valve, you remove the top of the radiator valve. Now that's normally just a pull-off top. Sometimes they can have a screw on the top of them, so that part there may have a screw in it. If you do, you need to undo the screw with a screwdriver and just pull the top off. Okay, then you get your pair of adjustable pliers, and because this is on the left hand side of the radiator, you turn the valve clockwise to turn it off. Okay, and when I turn it off, I normally then go back a quarter of a turn and then just go back again, just to ease the plunger into the seat, and if necessary just do it a couple of times, especially if the valve hasn't been off if the radiator hasn't been off for a while, then it's just best to work that valve in just to make sure that it's fully off. Okay, so once you've done that, you get your container, you put it underneath the radiator, and we need now to crack the radiator valve. And to do that, put a pair of water pump pliers on the body of the valve. Now, if they're a highly sort of polished valve, you sometimes need to put a piece of cloth on the valve body so that your pliers don't scratch the valve. But this one's not needed on this. Okay, and then you set your pliers onto the nut, and then just turn it. And this time it's anti-clockwise, and you'll see there's some small amount of water coming out the valve. That's absolutely fine. If you do get some water come out, if it spurts out, then just wait for it to stabilize a little bit before you go any further with the undoing of the nut. But when you see it dribbling out like that, that's fine. Okay, so the rest of it I can just undo manually. Okay, and once the nut's fully off, you then just very gently ease the valve out the way. Okay, and you'll notice now you've got some water dripping out of the valve. So what I do now, I put a piece of cloth in there, and just with your screwdriver, just put it in the end of the valve, and all that does, it just stops the water when you're moving the radiator, it stops any sort of further water coming out of the rad and getting dropped onto carpets or anything like that. Okay, now some people use sort of kitchen roll or something like that, but I'd always advise you use a piece of cloth, because kitchen roll can disintegrate and you can end up finding that it falls into the radiator and ends up blocking it. So a piece of cloth, just cut a small piece cut is fine. Okay, so that's the lock shield side done. So now we'll go over to the control side. Okay, and the same process really with this. We just use the pliers against the body and then crack the nut. And once you've cracked it a little bit, you can then just use your water pump pliers to do the rest of it. Okay, so again you'll notice there's just a little dribble of water coming out of there. Now if this is a big radiator, I'd suggest that you empty the water out of the radiator before you try to move it. The reason is it can be really heavy, and it's obviously better to move a light radiator rather than a heavy one. And to do that you would do what we've just done to the lock shield side, but on this side, when that's open, you would then get an air key in the air vent at the top of the radiator and just open it, and then you'll see when I open that air vent it allows the water out. Okay, and what you do is then fill the container up until till it's full, then turn the air key off like I've done there. Just put your finger over the end of the rad, just empty it into the bucket that you've got. Okay, put it down and do the same again until there's no more water, sorry, coming out of the radiator. Okay, now on this particular radiator it's not that heavy, so I'm not going to get any more water out of it, but I would advise you drain the radiator completely of water before you empty it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is put my piece of cloth in the end of the radiator like that and just push it in with a screwdriver. Okay, and now we're ready to lift the radiator off the wall and take it outside, and then you can decorate behind the radiator. Now what I'm going to show you with the radiator outside, I'm going to show you how to flush the radiator out if it's got some black sludge in the bottom of it. We have talked previously on other videos about sludge in the radiators and how they can stop the radiators from working. So if you're doing this because you've got sludge in the radiators and you don't want to paint behind it, then if you watch the next part, then that will show you how to remove any sludge in the bottom of the radiators. Okay, so to remove the radiator from the wall, first thing I'd recommend you do is put a couple of pieces of timber down. And the reason for that is that when you initially pull the radiator off the wall, it's always good to be able to put it down on the floor somewhere, and it just stops you from getting fingers trapped, and it just helps to keep it off the floor. So a couple of pieces of timber down. You then grab either side of the radiator, and it's probably best if two people do this, and just lift up, drop it straight down, and the radiator's off the hanging brackets. Okay, so we've disconnected the radiator and I've brought him outside. Now to flush the radiator out, all you do is put a hose on the end of the valve there, and just to connect that to a hose pipe and just run the hose through the valve. Okay, until you get clear water coming out. Now sometimes it's best if you fill the radiator up a few times and then just manually empty him like this. Okay, and just put the the hose back on. Okay, so now the water's running out clear. We now turn the tap off, empty the radiator, and go and put him back into position. So I'll do that now, and we'll resume the video with the rad back in position. Okay, so we've put the radiator back into position. What I'd normally do is put a container under it just to make sure there's no other drips coming out, and then we put the valve back on. Now, you don't normally need any jointing compound on that nut. There's normally sufficient from what was on there already, but very occasionally if you want to put a bit of jointing compound on the nut, I'll show you on the other one actually when we get it in place, and that's fine. Okay, so to do this nut up, you're turning anti-clockwise. You get it reasonably tight, and then you hold against yourself with a pair of water pump pliers. Okay, you just nip up. And we'll go across to the lock shield valve. Do that one. Okay, so both valves are nice and tight. So we now turn the radiator valves back on. So we'll turn the lock shield on first of all. Okay, and then I normally dry the valve off and just check it after 5 or so minutes just to make sure that there's no leaks. Sometimes you get the odd weep, so if you do, then you might just have to sort of nip the bottom nut up like that. Just do it a little bit. Fine, and then we put the top back on, and then we'll go back over to the control valve, and all we do that is obviously just turn the valve on. All that's left to do then is to vent the radiator at the top of the valve until you get water coming out. And the only other thing to consider here is that by doing this you may have depressurized the boiler. Now I do have a video where I show how to repressurize the boiler. So if you go onto that video, that will show you how to do that. Okay, so that is the end of the tutorial today on how to remove a radiator, and how to flush the radiator as well of any sludge that might be in the bottom of the rad.